Several years ago, Jack Weatherford published The Secret History of the Mongol Queens, How the Daughters of Genghis Khan Saved His Empire. There, he popularized the argument that Mongol Emperor Chinggis Khan relied upon his daughters for the expansion of his empire. In this video in our series on the daughters of Chinggis, we look at the lives of two daughters who did have such key roles. While our last episode introduced some aspects of medieval Mongolian marriage customs and spoke about the daughter's mother Borta and the oldest daughter Kojin Beki, in this part, we look at the lives of the three middle daughters, Chechiyegen, Alaqa Beki, and Tümelün. Chechiyegen was the second daughter of Chinggis Khan and his chief wife Borta. She was most likely born around 1187 or 88, after her brothers Jochi, Chagatai, and Ögedei. Like her older sister Kojin Beki, we have no mentions of her before her marriage, which is generally dated to about 1207. She, along with her niece, a daughter of Jochi named Kolui, were married into the Oirat ruling family and thereby secured their allegiance. The Oirat were among those people termed by the Mongols as Hoyen Ergen, or forest peoples, who lived north of the steppe in the southern reaches of the Siberian forests. The Oirat were a major grouping to the west of Lake Baikal, and their submission helped solidify the Mongol Empire's northern border, access to valuable furs, animals, and hunting birds of the forests, and became a major source of troops. Chechiyegen and Kolui married the princes Torolchi and Inalchi, the sons of the Oirat ruler Alaqa Beki. Depending on the source, Chechiyegen married Torolchi and Kolui the other, or vice versa. Probably what happened is that one brother died, and the other then inherited his wife. Regardless of her husband, Chechiyegen made a name for herself. In contrast to her sister, the rather quiet Kojin Beki, it seems Chechiyegen dominated the Oirat. Her husbands are almost never mentioned again after the marriage, and in some accounts are only referred to as Chechiyegen's husband. In the early 1250s, when her son Buka Timur led a major Oirat force with Hulagu on his western campaign against the Ismailis in Baghdad, these troops were reported as being from Chechiyegen, even by Juvayni, a Persian historian who traveled with Hulagu and Buka Timur. Juvayni does not name Chechiyegen's husband or father-in-law, and he literally was in a position to just ask. At around 60 years old, Chechiyegen may even have still been alive at the time of Juvayni's writing. In the rather later Altan Topçi, we even have Chechiyegen specifically being instructed to govern and control the Oirat, perhaps a distant memory of her actual influence and frustration at the power of the Oirat after the fall of the Mongol Empire. It is perhaps due to Chechiyegen's influence that the Oirat became such important parts of the Mongol army that they were remarked upon as one of the best-known peoples in it. Likely through Chechiyegen's efforts, most of her children married other Chinggisids. Now yes, that indicates what it sounds like. They were marrying their cousins, the children and grandchildren of Chechiyegen's brothers Jochi, Chagatai, and Tolui, though seemingly not the descendants of Ögedei. However, the medieval Mongols did consider this as exogamy. Basically, descent was being traced through the male line. Your patrilineal descent determined who you were related to. Thus, while they were daughters of Chinggis Khan, which politically superseded their husband's ranks, their offspring were now, by blood, of the husband's lineage. The daughter's children weren't Chinggisids, they were Ikiras, Oirat, and Kongarad. So in the Mongols' eyes, this was marrying outside of the family, perfectly suited for a Kura relationship. The Oirat were such a major source of wives that Juvayni in the 1250s remarked that all Mongol princes take their wives from the Oirat. Chechiyegen's daughters included women like Organa Hatun, who followed in her mother's footsteps. After the death of her husband Kara Hulagu Khan in 1252, Organa Hatun became the effective ruler of the Ulus of Chagatai, ruling on behalf of her young son Mubarak Shah, until deposed by her cousin and brother-in-law Erik Berka. Erik Berka was married to Organa's sister, Elchikmish, his senior wife. We are told that she was a very tall lady, and that Erik Berka loved Elchikmish very much, though their union produced no children. Due to this close marriage tie, when war broke out between Erik Berka and his older brother Kublai Khan in 1260 for control of the Mongol Empire, Erik Berka received major backing from his wife's people, the Oirat. But the defeat of Arik and a great massacre of the Oirat that took place in the war diminished their power among the Yuan dynasty somewhat, but Oirat continued to be highly influential in other parts of the Mongol Empire for decades to come. For Elchikmish, her fate was not a happy one. According to Rashid al-Din, when she learned of her husband's death, she tried to kill herself but was prevented and later died of her grief. It should be noted that there is argument by some historians that these prolonged Kura relationships over generations resulted in inbreeding and accounts for the shorter lifespans and health issues that plagued Khans by the 14th century. After 1280, very few Khans and Khatun's actually lived past 35 years old. While the Khans certainly had many wives and concubines, the only women who became empresses tended to be Ikiras, Oirat, and Kongarad, and thereby descendants of Chinggis Khan's daughters. And it was the children of these empresses who typically became Khans. This is a controversial argument, though, and genetic defects on account of inbreeding is actually a very hard thing to prove when none of these bodies survive the test on. Alaqa Beki was the third daughter of Chinggis Khan and Borte, likely born around 1190. Like her sisters, we first hear about her when she gets promised to a vassal. In this case, the ruling house of the Üngut, also known as the White Tartars, a more settled, Turkic-speaking people who practiced Eastern Christianity and ruled a kingdom in today's Inner Mongolia on the northern border of the Jin dynasty. Alaqa Beki's husband-to-be was Alakush Deget Kuri, the ruler of the Üngut, who threw off vassalage to the Jin in favor of siding with Chinggis Khan. Now, this case is fairly complex, and basically every source has a different version of it. This is because Alakush was killed in a coup soon after allying with Chinggis, and Alaqa Beki married a number of his sons and nephews. If she married Alakush before his death, and which of his sons, in what order, and in what years varies dramatically between these sources. The best explanation, I believe, comes from historian Christopher Atwood, which I'll summarize here. Alakush first allied with Temujin Khan in 1204, alerting him of an effort by the rival Taiyang Khan of the Naiman to induce the Üngut to attack Temujin's southern flank. Perhaps as early as this point, a marriage was proposed between Alakush and Temujin's daughter Alaqa. It is unlikely it ever commenced, as Alakush was murdered in a coup probably around 1207. In 1206, Temujin established the Mongol Empire and took the title of Chinggis Khan, but it was not until early 1211 that he took control of the Üngut capital of Tenduk. Likely at this point, a proper marriage was organized between Alaqa and Bayezpu, a nephew of Alakush. The Üngut soon became a major source of troops for the wars with the Jin dynasty. In 1217, when the general Mukhali became the chief commander of Mongol forces in China, the Üngut provided him 10,000 men led by Alaqa Beki's husband, Bayezpu. While her husband fought in China, Alaqa ruled the Üngut on his behalf, and when Bayezpu died sometime before 1219 during the fighting, Alaqa took direct control of the Üngut lands. To retain continuity in the dynasty, she remarried a younger cousin of her late husband, but he was powerless next to Alaqa Beki. A Song dynasty envoy to the Mongol Empire in 1221, Zhao Gong, described her role as administrator over the region, an area of cities, herders, and farmers. Her task was directly tied to the Mongol expansion in North China, providing troops and supplies, a staging ground for advancing armies, securing the border passes, as well as lines of communication into Mongolia. At the same time, she managed the government and administration of the cities in the Üngut lands and kept the region pacified in the midst of war and the coups it had suffered. Under her leadership, the Üngut remained a wealthy and influential part of the Mongol Empire. She stayed in this role until her death, likely in 1237, when Negude, her son, succeeded her as sole ruler of the Üngut. Now things will really start to get confusing. Tümelün was Chinggis Khan's fourth daughter with Borte, likely born around 1191. She's not to be confused with Temülün, Chinggis Khan's similarly named sister, who we mentioned briefly in the last episode. Generally, if you know one of Chinggis Khan's daughters by name, it's usually Tümelün. famous because of her involvement in the sack of Nishapur in 1221, where she took part in the massacre in revenge for the death of her husband Tokuchar outside the walls. My last video on Hutulun confidently repeated that. Except it's wrong. No historical source actually says Tümelün and Tokuchar were married. One of our sources for the sack of Nishapur, Juveni, mentions the involvement of a daughter of Chinggis Khan avenging the death of her husband Tokuchar of the Kongrad. As the daughter was unnamed in the passage, when translating it in the 1960s, John Andrew Boyle suggested Tümelün was the daughter in question, due to confusion over who she was actually married to. However, this hypothesis has been disproven, which leaves us with a weird situation where we don't actually know who Tokuchar was married to. He's mentioned as a son-in-law, but no source names her, so we can only presume she was a daughter of one of Chinggis's lesser wives or concubines. Now, what of Tümelün's actual husband then? Well, if you read the sources, you'll see a whole lineup of men listed from the Kongrad. Dergay Almal, Chiku, a fellow named Kurigan, and even Alchi Noyan, the brother of Borte, and thus Tümelün's uncle. More confusing is that Chiku is, in some accounts, a son of Dergay Almal, and in others, a son of Alchi Noyan. Some historical sources like Rashid al-Din try and harmonize these names and make Dergay Almal a title for Alchi Noyan, but this is untenable as they're clearly two different people. Dergay was an enemy of Chinggis Khan who later submitted and was offered a daughter in marriage, only for Dergay to refuse because he thought she was ugly and looked like a frog. This resulted in the least surprising execution in history. Though Rashid al-Din leaves the daughter unnamed in that specific passage, from the context we are led to assume the poor daughter insulted here was Tümelün. In contrast, Alchi Noyan remained a powerful figure of distinguished career and character, living at least into the mid-1230s. So how do we make sense of this? Christopher Atwood once again has a solution which best navigates these conflicting accounts. He argues Chiku was in fact the son of Dergay Almal, whose family was thrown into turmoil with Dergay's execution for the insult of Tümelün. But for Chinggis Khan, it was still necessary to maintain the loyalty of Dergay's followers, a large faction of the Kongrad lineage and their subjects. However, Chiku himself was too young to rule them, and still needed to prove his value after the shameful death of his father. Thus, a solution was reached. Chiku accompanied Chinggis Khan's sons in the wars against the Jin dynasty, and at the end of his service would be rewarded with the marriage to Tümelün, the bride promised to his late father. Over the following years, Chiku made a name for himself as a fearsome and fearless warrior well known for storming fortresses. In the meantime, Chiku was adopted by Alchi Noyan, a means to tighten Alchi's, and by extension Alchi's brother-in-law Chinggis Khan's, power over the Kongrad after Dergay's death. As well, Alchi may have married Tümelün as a sort of temporary formality, preserving Tümelün's honor so she did not remain unwed for many years waiting for Chiku. This would explain a few strange mentions of Alchi being Kurigan, or Zhao Gong in 1221 noting Alchi as being wed to one of Chinggis Khan's daughters, or statements by Rashid al-Din where Tümelün's daughter Bulga is described as a granddaughter of Alchi Noyan, but not by blood. In this way, Atwood, persuasively I think, navigates the rather strange set of relationships the sources outline here. The marriage between Chiku and Tümelün finally took place sometime after 1221. Soon after, they were given lands in modern China's Qinghai province, on the northern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. In 1236, they were among the members of the royal family who received more fiefs across North China, and their descendants remained in the region as local powers until the end of the Yuan dynasty. Chiku and Tümelün brought many Kongrad with them. People with the name Kongrad are still found among the Mongolic-speaking Uyghur in the same region today. Next time we come to the final daughter of Chinggis Khan and Borte, Altülün, and a set of scandals that the great Khans did their best to try and hide.